The billionaire's son could never walk, a disability that seemed to define his existence in the mansion's gilded cage. His world changed forever when the Black Maid, a woman society had taught him to overlook, performed an act of such profound compassion that it shattered everything he thought he knew about life, privilege, and human connection. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Maya Williams arrived at the Whitmore estate well before dawn, slipping through the service entrance with practiced silence. The marble floors gleamed under the dim hallway lights as she made her way toward the kitchen to begin her morning duties. Her heart pounded with familiar anxiety, another day of invisibility in a mansion where wealth spoke louder than words. The early morning quiet was broken only by the gentle hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of the century-old structure. Maya had memorized every corner of this place over her 2 years of employment, learning which floorboards announced her presence and which paths kept her unnoticed by the family. She paused outside young Ethan Whitmore's room, listening for any signs of distress. The 7-year-old boy often woke early, trapped in his specially designed bed, unable to move his legs since the accident 3 years ago. Today, she heard a soft whimper and gently pushed the door open. "Good morning, sunshine," Maya whispered, her voice warm as she approached his bedside. Ethan's eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Maya, I had a dream I could run." Something in his voice, a certainty, a hope, made her pause as she adjusted his pillows. "Dreams can come true, you know," she said, helping him sit upright. When Ethan reached for her hand, Maya instinctively took it, expecting to guide him through his morning stretches as she'd done countless times before. But instead of lying still, the boy suddenly pulled himself forward with unexpected strength. "I want to try," he insisted, his small face determined. Maya hesitated, knowing the doctors had declared his condition permanent. Yet something in his eyes made her nod. "I'm right here," she promised. With trembling effort, Ethan swung his legs over the bed's edge. Maya supported his weight as he slid to the floor, his bare feet touching the cool hardwood. Then, incredibly, his fingers loosened their grip on hers. He wobbled, uncertain but determined, and took one shaky step forward, then another. The door burst open with a bang. Charles Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway, his morning coffee splashing onto the imported carpet. His eyes widened at the impossible sight of his son standing, walking, guided only by the gentle presence of their maid. "What are you doing?" he bellowed, shock transforming instantly to rage. He could fall. He could hurt himself. "Daddy, look, I'm walking!" Ethan cried excitedly, but Charles was already striding across the room, grabbing Maya's arm roughly. "You're fired!" he hissed, his voice trembling with fury. "How dare you risk my son's safety?" Before Maya could explain, Charles dragged her through the mansion and out to the garden, where he shoved her with such force that she stumbled backward into the decorative koi pond. The cold water shocked her system as Charles towered above her. "Never return to this house," he commanded, leaving Maya shivering in the water, her dignity intact, but her heart breaking for the boy she'd left behind. Maya Williams trudged down the winding driveway of the Whitmore estate, her uniform clinging to her body. Heavy with pond water, droplets trailed behind her, marking her path of humiliation. The scent of water lilies, once her favorite part of the grounds, now clung to her skin like a reminder of her sudden fall from grace. Despite the chill seeping into her bones, she walked with her head high, refusing to let her dignity be washed away as easily as Charles had discarded her. Her mind replayed the morning's events in painful detail, the way Ethan's small hand had reached for hers. Trusting and determined, The miraculous moment when his feet had steadied beneath him, the pure joy in his eyes as he'd taken those first impossible steps. Then, the door bursting open, Charles's face contorting from shock to fury in an instant. The accusation in his voice when he'd shouted those two devastating words. And finally, Ethan's confused tears as his father had physically removed Maya from the room, marching her straight to the koi pond, where he'd pushed her with enough force to send her stumbling backward into the water. "He'll forget me by tomorrow," she whispered to herself, though the ache in her chest suggested she wouldn't forget him nearly as quickly. Back at the mansion, as twilight descended over Atlanta, Charles Whitmore sat alone in his mahogany-panelled study. A tumbler of whiskey remained untouched at his elbow as he rewound the security footage for the fourth time. The screen displayed the morning room from a high angle, capturing everything: Maya's gentle encouragement, Ethan's determined expression, and the unmistakable moment when his son, diagnosed as permanently paralyzed from the waist down, stood and took 3 wobbly steps. The billionaire leaned forward, his fingers tracing his son's image on the screen. 3 years of specialists, experimental treatments, and private therapists had yielded nothing. Yet this woman, this maid he barely acknowledged, had somehow accomplished what millions of dollars couldn't buy. Guilt gnawed at his insides like a living thing. He'd fired her, humiliated her, pushed her into the water like she was nothing. Charles buried his face in his hands, his shoulders slumping beneath the weight of his mistake. For the first time in decades, his carefully constructed pride crumbled, leaving only the bitter taste of regret. "What have I done?" he whispered to the empty room, the security footage playing its damning evidence on an endless loop before him. The first light of dawn barely filtered through the threadbare curtains of Maya Williams's apartment when a sharp knock echoed through the small space. She hadn't slept well, replaying yesterday's humiliation over and over. Opening the door, she froze. Charles Whitmore himself stood in her doorway, his tailored suit incongruous against the peeling paint of her building's hallway. "Miss Williams," he began, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "I need you to return to the estate." His eyes, normally cold and calculating, now held something unfamiliar: desperation. Maya crossed her arms, the memory of the koi pond water still fresh. "You made your position quite clear yesterday, Mr. Whitmore." "Ethan won't stop crying," Charles admitted, his shoulders slumping slightly. "He's refusing therapy, refusing food. He keeps asking for you." He paused, the words clearly difficult. "I was wrong." Maya turned away, conflicted. Her dignity demanded she refuse, but Ethan's face flashed in her mind, his hopeful eyes when he'd taken those first wobbly steps toward her, the trust in his expression. That trust had cost her her job, yet somehow she couldn't abandon him. "I'll double your salary," Charles added. Misreading her hesitation, "This isn't about money," Maya replied quietly. "It's about respect." Charles nodded slowly. "You have mine now. Please, he needs you." The drive back to the Whitmore estate in Charles's luxury vehicle passed in uncomfortable silence. Maya gazed out the window, steeling herself for what awaited. As the car pulled through the wrought-iron gates, she felt the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. Inside the mansion, the atmosphere had shifted. The housekeeper averted her eyes as Maya passed. The gardener, who had always shared friendly words, suddenly found his pruning shears fascinating. Only Mr. Hargrave, the butler, offered a subtle nod of acknowledgement. When she reached Ethan's room, the boy's face transformed. "Maya!" he cried, reaching for her with both arms. She embraced him, feeling his small body trembling with excitement. "You came back," he whispered against her shoulder. "I did," she answered, helping him sit up properly in his wheelchair. Charles watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Maya met his gaze steadily, silently establishing new boundaries. This time would be different. Later, as she helped Ethan practice his exercises, Maya made a silent promise to herself. She would help this child walk properly, not for Charles Whitmore's money or approval, not for redemption in the eyes of the staff who now regarded her with suspicion, but for Ethan himself. The path ahead would be difficult, but watching the determination in the boy's eyes as he gripped her hands, Maya knew some journeys were worth every step. The transformation in Ethan Whitmore was nothing short of remarkable. Within a week of Maya Williams' return to the mansion, the young boy who doctors had declared would never walk again was taking steps that grew stronger and more confident each day. Maya's gentle encouragement echoed through the sunlit therapy room as Ethan gripped her hands, his face a portrait of determination. "Just one more step," she would whisper, and Ethan would push forward, his small legs trembling but holding. Charles watched from the doorway, his expression a complex mixture of awe and lingering guilt. The expensive specialists he had flown in from across the country had achieved nothing close to this progress. Did you see that?" Ethan called out one afternoon, having walked nearly 10 feet without pausing. "Maya says I'm going to race her soon." His laughter, once so rare in the cold halls of the Whitmore estate, now bubbled freely whenever the maid was near. Yet, as Ethan's steps grew steadier, the atmosphere among the staff turned increasingly frigid. Maya felt it first in the kitchen when she went to prepare Ethan's afternoon snack. The chef, who had always been cordial, suddenly found reasons to be elsewhere, leaving ingredients just out of her reach. When she asked for assistance, he muttered something about knowing one's place, before reluctantly sliding the fruit platter toward her. In the East Wing corridor, Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper who had worked for the Whitmore family for 20 years, fell silent as Maya approached, her hushed conversation with another maid cutting off abruptly. Their eyes followed her with undisguised suspicion as she passed. "Getting quite comfortable here, aren't we?" Mrs. Patterson remarked loudly enough for Maya to hear. "Some people forget they're just the help." The subtle hostility crystallized into something more tangible 3 days later. Maya was collecting her uniform from the staff laundry room when a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor from between the pressed fabrics. Her heart sank as she read the typewritten message, "Leave before it gets worse." She tucked the note into her pocket, her hands steady despite the chill that ran through her body. Through the window, she could see Charles walking with Ethan in the garden, the boy taking careful steps alongside his father. The sight strengthened her resolve. Whatever resentment was brewing among the staff, Maya wouldn't abandon Ethan now, not when he was finally finding his way forward. Maya Williams began to sense the growing hostility around her. Shadows seemed to linger in the mansion's long corridors, and conversations abruptly ceased whenever she entered a room. Walking through the kitchen one morning, she caught the chef and 2 housekeepers exchanging meaningful glances before quickly dispersing. The weight of unseen eyes followed her throughout the day. "Did you need something?" she asked calmly when she spotted Mr. Hargrave watching her from the doorway as she helped Ethan with his exercises. The butler straightened his posture. "No, just passing by," he replied, though his lingering gaze suggested otherwise. Despite the mounting tension, Maya refused to let fear derail her purpose at the Whitmore estate. Each morning, she arrived with renewed determination, focusing on Ethan's progress rather than the whispers that trailed her. The boy's smile when he managed to stand for 30 seconds without support was worth every cold shoulder and suspicious glance. "Again, Maya, watch me do it again," Ethan would exclaim, his face glowing with pride as he took wobbly steps across his bedroom. Charles Whitmore observed these sessions from a distance, initially skeptical but increasingly impressed. The expensive physical therapists he had hired, specialists from Switzerland, Rehabilitation experts from Johns Hopkins had all failed where this humble maid was succeeding. His son, who had rejected every professional with tantrums and tears, now eagerly anticipated his daily sessions with Maya. One afternoon, Charles entered the sunroom to find Ethan laughing as Maya taught him a clapping game to improve his coordination. The sound was so foreign in the usually somber mansion that he stopped in his tracks. "He hasn't laughed like that since before the accident," Charles said quietly. Maya nodded, but continued the game, maintaining her focus on Ethan rather than his father. Later that night, alone in his study with a glass of bourbon, Charles reviewed the medical reports that had promised his son would never walk again. He thought about the millions of dollars spent on treatments, the specialists who had shaken their heads sympathetically while cashing his checks. Then he thought about Maya, her gentle persistence, her natural understanding of his son's needs. The realization left him wrestling with complicated emotions: regret for his initial treatment of her, admiration for her unwavering dedication, and an uncomfortable awareness of his own prejudices. The bond between Ethan and Maya had become the single bright spot in the cold marble halls of the Whitmore mansion. Charles set down his glass, a decision forming in his mind. Whatever was happening between the staff and Maya needed to end. His son's progress was too important to jeopardize. Word of Ethan Whitmore's miraculous progress spread through Atlanta's elite circles like wildfire. What began as hushed conversations at country club brunches soon evolved into full-blown speculation that dominated social gatherings across Georgia. The son of Charles Whitmore, paralyzed since birth according to most accounts, was suddenly taking steps. And not because of some revolutionary Swiss treatment or renowned specialist. "It's that Maid," whispered Veronica Ashton to her circle during afternoon tea. "Apparently she's got him walking when all those fancy doctors couldn't." The raised eyebrows and knowing glances spoke volumes. One has to wonder what else she might be after. Inside the mansion, Maya Williams felt the atmosphere shift. Staff members who once barely acknowledged her now watched her movements with suspicious eyes. The housekeeper, accidentally, bumped into her twice in one morning, spilling cleaning solution on Maya's uniform. "Oh, sorry," she'd said with a thin smile. "Didn't see you reaching above the shelf." The tabloids caught wind of the story by midweek. "Miracle Maid or Gold Digger?" screamed one headline, featuring a grainy photo of Maya entering the Whitmore estate. Another publication speculated about unconventional methods being used on the billionaire's son, with thinly veiled implications that made Maya's stomach turn. Charles noticed the headlines while his driver navigated through morning traffic. He frowned, tossing the newspaper aside, but said nothing to Maya when their paths crossed later that day. The annual Children's Hospital charity gala became Maya's unexpected battlefield. Charles had insisted she attend "Ethan Wants You There," providing her with a modest but appropriate evening dress. She stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, feeling every glance like a physical touch. "I hear the Whitmores are starting a new staffing trend," came a loud voice from a nearby circle. "Apparently, the secret to good childcare is hiring miracle maids instead of qualified professionals." Laughter rippled through the group as Maya froze. Punch glass halfway to her lips. "Perhaps we should all fire our physical therapists," added another woman, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she gestured dramatically. "Who needs medical degrees when you have whatever she has?" Maya felt her cheeks burn, but beneath the table, she felt small fingers slip into hers. Ethan looked up at her, his innocent eyes offering strength where words failed. He squeezed her hand 3 times, their secret code for "I need you," and suddenly the cruel laughter faded to background noise. She squeezed back 4 times, "I'm not going anywhere." Margaret Whitmore arrived at the Atlanta estate with 3 Louis Vuitton suitcases and a scowl that could freeze the Georgia summer heat. Her pearls clicked against her collarbone as she surveyed the mansion's foyer with critical eyes, barely acknowledging the staff, who scrambled to take her luggage. "Where is she?" were Margaret's first words to her brother, not bothering with pleasantries. Charles Whitmore's explanation about Maya's role in Ethan's progress fell on deliberately deaf ears. The socialite merely tightened her lips and retreated to the East Wing guest suite, where she immediately made 3 phone calls. By dinner, Margaret had already established her presence. She positioned herself at the table where she could observe Maya serving Ethan, noting every interaction with calculated precision. When Maya helped the boy cut his chicken, Margaret's eyebrow arched so high it nearly disappeared into her hairline. "I've heard about your methods," Margaret said later that evening, cornering Maya in the hallway. "Quite extraordinary that a maid would know more than specialists with medical degrees." Her smile never reached her eyes as she added, "I'm simply concerned about my nephew's well-being." The next morning, Maya noticed a black sedan parked across from the estate's gates. The same vehicle appeared outside the grocery store when she ran errands, and again near the park where she took Ethan for fresh air. The man inside never approached, but his camera lens followed her movements with unsettling persistence. "You seem distracted today," Mr. Hargrave commented as Maya polished silverware with unusual intensity. The butler's perceptive eyes missed nothing, but Maya merely shook her head, unwilling to voice her growing unease. Margaret, meanwhile, conducted her campaign with surgical precision. She summoned the household staff one by one to her quarters, emerging with files and photographs that she studied late into the night. The investigator she'd hired, a former police detective with questionable ethics, delivered daily reports directly to her smartphone. "I'm simply conducting due diligence," Margaret explained to Charles when he questioned her about the strange man photographing the estate. "Any responsible guardian would want to know who's influencing Ethan." Her brother's frustration bounced off her practiced composure like raindrops on marble. Maya felt the atmosphere shifting, tension creeping through the mansion like morning fog. Staff members who had begun warming to her now averted their eyes in Margaret's presence. Notes appeared in her locker, schedule changes, additional duties, always in Margaret's elegant script and always designed to separate her from Ethan. Every interaction with the New York socialite left Maya feeling as though she'd been measured and found wanting. Margaret's words dripped with courtesy, while her eyes issued clear warnings. This territory was being reclaimed, and Maya Williams was the intruder who needed to be removed. Mr. Hargrave moved through the Whitmore mansion like a ghost, his years of service having taught him the art of invisibility. Maya Williams had grown accustomed to his distant gaze, the way his eyes seemed to look through her rather than at her. But something had shifted in the wake of Ethan's progress. One morning, Maya found a steaming cup of chamomile tea waiting on the small table outside her quarters. The next day, a fresh gardenia, her favorite flower, though she'd mentioned it only once in passing. When she glanced up from helping Ethan with his exercises, she caught Mr. Hargrave's slight nod before he disappeared around the corner. "Thank you," Maya whispered when she finally caught him alone in the east corridor. "For the tea and flowers." The butler straightened his already impeccable posture. "I've served this family for 27 years, Miss Williams. I recognize genuine care when I see it." His voice remained formal, but the ice had thawed. Maya soon noticed other small changes. The chef who had once forgotten her lunch requests now prepared her favorite sandwich without prompting. The gardener left fresh-cut roses by her window. Even some of the housekeepers who had whispered behind her back now offered hesitant smiles. "They're watching Ethan," Mr. Hargrave explained one evening. "They see what you've done for him. Not everyone in this house bows to tradition. The butler's quiet alliance gave Maya strength, but it couldn't protect her from what came next. The first note appeared tucked beneath her door, block letters cut from magazines like a ransom demand. Accidents happen to people who don't know their place. Maya's hands trembled as she folded the paper and locked it in her drawer. She told herself it was just intimidation, nothing more. 3 days later, she found another note inside her uniform pocket. "You don't belong here. Leave before you ruin everything." The threat felt more personal, more invasive. Someone had touched her belongings, invaded her small sanctuary within the mansion. The metallic taste of fear lingered as she sipped her morning tea, wondering which faces that smiled at her during the day transformed into threats at night. Was it Margaret's doing? Or someone else who resented her growing influence in the household? When Mr. Hargrave noticed her distraction, he paused beside her. "Is everything all right, Miss Williams?" Maya considered showing him the notes, but hesitated. The butler had risked enough already by showing her kindness. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and forced a smile. "Yes," she lied, "everything's fine." But as she walked away, she felt watched, not by allies this time, but by someone who wanted her gone, someone willing to do whatever it took to make that happen. The therapy room echoed with Ethan Whitmore's desperate wails. The renowned physical therapist from Switzerland, the fourth one Charles had flown in this month, stood helplessly as the boy thrashed on the exercise mat. "I want Maya! I want Maya!" Ethan screamed, his small face flushed with determination. His latest tantrum had lasted 20 minutes, and the therapist's patience was wearing thin. Charles paced outside the door, his expensive Italian shoes wearing a path in the hallway carpet. When the therapist emerged with a defeated shrug, Charles knew what would happen next. It was the same scene that had played out repeatedly over the past weeks. "Mr. Whitmore, I cannot work with your son unless he cooperates," the specialist said, gathering his equipment. Perhaps we should reschedule when he's in a more receptive mood." Charles ran his hand through his greying hair. "Just wait here," he muttered, the words tasting bitter as he strode toward the servants' quarters. Maya was folding linens when Charles appeared in the doorway. Their eyes met, and without a word exchanged, she nodded and followed him back to the therapy room. The transformation was immediate. The moment Ethan saw Maya Williams, his cries ceased. His little arms reached for her, and she knelt beside him with a gentle smile. "Ready to show me your strong legs today?" she asked softly. The boy nodded, his earlier distress forgotten. Charles watched from the doorway as Maya guided Ethan through exercises the specialist had been attempting for an hour. Her methods were different, gentler, more intuitive. She sang little songs as Ethan stretched, told stories that made him giggle as he practiced standing. "Look at me, Maya. Look what I can do." Ethan beamed as he took 3 wobbly steps while holding just one of her fingers. The billionaire felt something crack inside his chest. For months, he had paid astronomical sums to the world's leading pediatric specialists. He had invested in cutting-edge equipment, experimental treatments, and private consultations. Yet here was this woman, this maid he had once fired and thrown into the koi pond, accomplishing what medicine's finest could not. The Swiss therapist observed with professional curiosity. "She has a natural gift," he remarked quietly to Charles. "The boy trusts her completely." Charles nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. The walls of privilege and prejudice he had built throughout his life were crumbling before his eyes. His son's progress wasn't coming from the prestigious medical degrees or expensive treatments he had always believed in. It was coming from Maya's hands, gentle, patient, and unwavering in their belief that Ethan could walk. Margaret Whitmore paced the library like a caged animal, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor with increasing intensity. The morning light caught the diamonds on her fingers as she clenched and unclenched her fists. Maya Williams had proven more resilient than expected, and Margaret's patience had worn dangerously thin. When Maya entered with fresh flowers for the antique vase, Margaret seized her opportunity. She closed the heavy oak door with a decisive click. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries," Margaret said, her voice honey-coated but eyes cold as ice. "You've become quite the fixture here, haven't you?" Maya stood straight, clutching the vase. "I'm just doing my job, Miss Whitmore." $20,000. Margaret pulled a checkbook from her handbag. "Cash, if you prefer. Just walk away and never contact this family again." The amount hung in the air between them, more money than Maya had ever seen at once. For a fleeting moment, she thought of what it could do. Pay off her mother's medical bills. Finish her education. 30,000. Margaret pressed, mistaking Maya's silence for negotiation. "Final offer." Maya set the vase down carefully. "I can't be bought, Ms. Whitmore. Ethan needs consistency right now." "Don't pretend this is about Ethan," Margaret hissed, dropping all pretense. "You've wormed your way into Charles's good graces, and we both know why." "I'm here because your nephew can walk when everyone said he couldn't," Maya replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That's the only reason." Neither woman noticed Charles Whitmore standing in the doorway, his face darkening with each word exchanged. He'd come looking for a book, but found something far more revealing. "That's enough, Margaret," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. His sister whirled around, checkbook still in hand. "Charles, I was just trying to bribe my son's caretaker." He stepped fully into the room, the woman who accomplished what a team of specialists couldn't. The siblings faced off in the center of the library, their argument escalating until it echoed through the mansion's corridors. Staff members froze in their tasks, exchanging glances as the Whitmore family's private war spilled beyond closed doors. "You've changed, Charles," Margaret accused, her voice breaking. "This isn't about Ethan anymore." "Maybe I have changed," he admitted, "and maybe it's about time." Maya slipped out quietly, but the damage was done. By evening, the entire household knew Charles Whitmore had chosen his son's caretaker over his own sister, shattering decades of family allegiance and forever altering the power dynamics within the mansion's walls. The headline splashed across the Atlanta Gazette's website was impossible to miss: "Maid's Miracle or Millionaire's Mistress." Beneath it, doctored photos showed Maya Williams and Charles Whitmore in what appeared to be intimate moments, her hand on his arm as she guided Ethan through therapy, digitally darkened and cropped to suggest something sinister. Maya's phone buzzed incessantly with texts from friends who'd seen the story. She sat on the edge of her bed in the servants' quarters, hands trembling as she scrolled through comments calling her a gold digger and home wrecker. The article painted her as a calculating woman who had seduced the billionaire while exploiting his vulnerable son's condition. "They've twisted everything," she whispered, fighting back tears. The journalist had even quoted an anonymous source, claiming Maya had deliberately orchestrated Ethan's progress to manipulate Charles. The source's words had Margaret's fingerprints all over them. When Maya entered the kitchen that morning, conversations abruptly ceased. The chef turned away, and two housekeepers exchanged knowing glances. Only Mr. Hargrave offered a sympathetic nod as he placed a cup of tea before her. "Hold your head high," the butler murmured. "This too shall pass." By afternoon, the story had spread to national outlets. Maya's phone rang with calls from reporters offering substantial sums for her side of the scandal. She declined them all, her dignity intact despite the assault on her character. Charles found her in the garden, where she sat watching Ethan practice his steps between two rose bushes. The businessman's face was drawn with worry, his normally confident posture diminished. "I've seen the articles," he said, sitting beside her on the stone bench. "Oh, this is Margaret's doing." Maya nodded silently, watching Ethan count his steps aloud. "I've called a press conference for this evening," Charles continued. "I won't let them destroy what you've done for my son." That evening, Maya watched from the mansion's library as Charles stood before a sea of cameras. The man who had once thrown her into the koi pond now defended her with unwavering conviction. "Maya Williams is the reason my son can walk today," he declared, his voice firm despite the flashing cameras. "Any suggestion of impropriety is not only false but malicious. I stand by her character completely." The statement sent shockwaves through Atlanta's elite circles. Charles Whitmore had never publicly defended anyone, certainly not a member of his staff. By morning, social media buzzed with speculation about his motives, but Maya felt a fragile hope. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she wasn't fighting alone. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Charles Whitmore found Maya Williams sitting alone in the kitchen. She startled slightly, her cup of chamomile tea still steaming between her hands. "Couldn't sleep either?" Charles asked, his voice softer than Maya had ever heard it. She shook her head, watching as the billionaire, still in his dress shirt but with the sleeves rolled up, poured himself a cup. The kitchen, normally bustling with staff, felt intimate in the midnight quiet. "Ethan walked 10 steps today," Maya said, breaking the silence. Charles nodded, a smile briefly crossing his face before fading into something more solemn. "I never told anyone this," he began, staring into his cup. "When I was 8, there was a woman who worked for my father. Eliza was her name." Maya listened as he described how Eliza had been the only one to attend his school plays, to notice when he was upset, to teach him to tie his shoes when his parents were too busy with social obligations. "One day, she was just gone," Charles continued, his voice catching. "My father fired her because someone at his club made a comment about how close she was to me. Said it wasn't proper for a black woman to have such influence over a Whitmore heir." The kitchen fell silent again. Maya could see the shame in his eyes, not just for his father's actions, but for how closely he had followed that same path with her. "I looked for her years later," he admitted, "never found her." Maya reached across the table, not quite touching his hand. "It's not too late to break the cycle." Charles nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I'm trying," he said simply. The next morning, Maya found Ethan at his small desk, colored pencils scattered around him. The boy beamed as she entered, holding up his latest creation with pride. "And look what I made," Ethan exclaimed. The drawing showed 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall with a tie, clearly Charles, one small with yellow hair, Ethan, and one with curly hair and a bright smile, Maya. Above them, a rainbow arched across the page. "It's us," Ethan explained unnecessarily, his voice full of certainty. "We're a family now." Maya carefully took the drawing, emotion tightening her throat. She knew Charles still had much to learn about confronting his privilege, about truly seeing people beyond their roles in his life. But Ethan, innocent, hopeful Ethan, had already grasped what the adults were struggling to build. "Can we put it on the fridge?" Ethan asked. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Maya replied, seeing in the childish lines a blueprint for healing that no amount of wealth could buy. Margaret Whitmore stormed into the mansion's library, slamming a thick folder onto the mahogany table where Charles sat reviewing documents. Her pearls clicked against each other as she leaned forward, a victorious smile playing on her lips. "I've spoken with Jameson," she announced, referring to the family's longtime attorney. "We're filing for a court order to remove that woman from the estate immediately. The papers cite emotional instability and unhealthy attachment to Ethan." Charles looked up, his face hardening. "You've gone too far, Margaret." "Have I? Or are you too blind to see what's happening?" She slid the documents toward her brother. "This maid has manipulated her way into our lives, and you're letting her." Within 48 hours, Maya Williams received the formal notice. Her hands trembled as she read the clinical language describing her as emotionally unstable and manipulative. The court date was set for the following week, barely enough time to find representation. That night, alone in her quarters, Maya's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down her face as she considered her options. She had no resources to fight a legal battle against the Whitmore fortune. The weight of injustice pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. "They want to take me away from Ethan," she whispered to herself, picturing the boy's confused face when she wouldn't appear for their morning routine. By morning, Maya had made her decision. She would fight. Charles appeared at her door before breakfast, his expression grave. "I've arranged for Patricia Dawson to represent you. She's the best attorney in Atlanta." Maya studied his face. "Why are you helping me?" "Because my son needs you," he replied simply, "and because it's right." The courthouse buzzed with activity as Maya took the stand. Camera flashes exploded from the gallery, where reporters jostled for position. Her voice wavered as she began her testimony, but grew stronger with each word. "I never intended to become important to Ethan," she explained. "I was just doing my job when I noticed he responded to my encouragement. The first time he stood, holding my hands, I saw hope in his eyes that no expensive therapy had ever put there." Margaret watched from across the courtroom, her lips pressed into a thin line as Maya continued, "I'm not asking for money or recognition. I'm asking to continue helping a child who trusts me." The judge leaned forward, studying Maya's earnest expression as she described the threatening notes, the surveillance, and Margaret's bribe. Though the media circled like vultures, something unexpected was happening. The truth was cutting through the carefully constructed narrative of the scheming maid. Even as Margaret's attorney attempted to paint Maya as calculating and unstable, the authenticity in her testimony began to resonate with everyone in the courtroom. The courthouse steps became a sea of supporters as Maya Williams arrived for another day of testimony. For 3 consecutive days, members of Atlanta's black community had gathered outside the Whitmore estate, their voices rising in hymns of solidarity. Hand-painted signs bobbed above the crowd, "Let Maya help Ethan walk," and "Justice for Maya," alongside "Black excellence can't be silenced." Local church groups organized prayer circles, while community leaders spoke to news cameras about the deeper implications of Maya's treatment. "This isn't just about one woman's job," Reverend Jackson told reporters. "It's about recognizing dignity and value regardless of position." Inside the courtroom, Maya sat straight back despite her exhaustion. Charles occupied a seat directly behind her, a deliberate statement that didn't go unnoticed by the press. Margaret glared from across the aisle, her pearl necklace clutched tight between manicured fingers. The atmosphere within the mansion had shifted dramatically. Cook prepared Maya's favorite tea without being asked. The groundskeeper nodded respectfully when their paths crossed. Even the housekeeper, who had once been Margaret's most loyal informant, slipped Maya a note, "We're with you." Most surprising was Mr. Hargrave's transformation. The butler, who had once looked through Maya as if she were part of the furniture, now stood tall on the witness stand, his testimony devastating to Margaret's case. "Miss Whitmore instructed me to monitor Ms. Williams' movements and report back daily," he stated, his voice steady despite Margaret's withering stare. She ordered staff to make Mrs. Williams uncomfortable enough to leave voluntarily. When that failed, she escalated to more direct methods of intimidation. The courtroom buzzed as Mr. Hargrave described finding threatening notes in Margaret's handwriting, detailing plans to plant evidence in Maya's quarters. "I've served the Whitmore family for 27 years, he concluded, but I cannot remain silent when witnessing such injustice." Outside, the crowd had grown. Social media amplified their message, with hashtags trending nationwide. Local businesses donated food and water to the protesters, while ride-sharing drivers offered free transportation to the courthouse for Maya's supporters. That evening, returning to the estate, Maya found Ethan waiting anxiously. The boy grabbed her hand the moment she entered, pulling her toward his therapy room. "I practiced all day," he announced proudly, then walked 10 steps, completely unassisted. Charles watched from the doorway, his eyes glistening. "The lawyers say we're winning," he told her quietly. "The judge sees through Margaret's claims." Maya nodded, too moved to speak as Ethan hugged her legs. In that moment, the crowds outside, the testimony, the legal battle, all of it seemed distant compared to the miracle of this child's determined steps forward. Margaret Whitmore paced her guest suite, the pearls around her neck clicking with each agitated step. Her reflection in the antique mirror showed a woman unraveling at the edges. 3 weeks had passed, and Maya Williams remained firmly entrenched in the mansion despite her best efforts. "I need something concrete," she muttered to herself, scrolling through her smartphone contacts. Her finger paused on a name, a private investigator she'd used for other delicate matters. The call was brief, her instructions precise. 2 nights later, a shadow moved across the estate grounds. Bypassing security through a service entrance code Margaret had provided, the intruder, a former security specialist, slipped into Maya's quarters during dinner when the maid was helping Ethan with his evening routine. With practiced efficiency, he installed 3 miniature surveillance devices, one in the bedroom lamp, another in the bathroom vent, and the third disguised as a smoke detector. Margaret waited eagerly for the footage, convinced Maya would reveal her true nature when alone. Perhaps she stole jewelry, or made unauthorized calls, or simply displayed the calculated ambition Margaret was certain lurked beneath her humble facade. What she didn't anticipate was Mr. Hargrave's watchful eye. The butler had grown increasingly protective of Maya, noticing small disturbances in the wing where staff quarters were located. His suspicions aroused, he mentioned the oddities to the head of security. By morning, a routine security sweep discovered the unauthorized devices. Charles Whitmore was immediately notified, his face darkening as technicians explained the sophisticated equipment. These weren't amateur devices, they were professional-grade surveillance tools. "Who would do this?" he demanded, though in his heart he already knew. The security team traced the digital signature to an account paid for by Margaret's personal credit card. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. Charles found his sister in the garden, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. "You've gone too far," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You don't understand what's at stake," Margaret replied, not bothering to deny her involvement. "That woman is destroying everything our family built." "No," Charles countered, "she's revealing what we've become, and I won't allow it anymore." That afternoon, Charles did something the Whitmore family rarely did. He involved the authorities. Officers arrived discreetly, but the staff witnessed Margaret being questioned in the library. Charges of invasion of privacy and harassment were filed, with Charles himself providing the statement. By evening, news had leaked to local media. The headline was devastating: "Whitmore heiress charged with stalking family employee." The dynasty that Margaret had fought so desperately to protect now faced its greatest scandal, one entirely of her making. As she was escorted from the property, Margaret locked eyes with Maya across the foyer. In that moment, both women knew the power balance had irreversibly shifted. The video appeared on social media without warning. Someone had captured Ethan Whitmore, taking his first independent steps across the mansion's sunlit conservatory. The footage showed the small boy's determined face, his tongue pressed between his lips in concentration as he wobbled forward on unsteady legs. What made the clip truly remarkable wasn't just the medical impossibility unfolding, it was the pure joy radiating from Ethan as he called out, "Maya, look, I'm doing it." Within hours, the video had been viewed millions of times. News outlets across Atlanta picked up the story, and by evening, national networks were running special segments. The child who doctors had declared would never walk again was defying all medical predictions, and the person he credited wasn't a renowned specialist or cutting-edge therapy. It was Maya Williams, the maid who had believed in him when no one else would. Charles watched the public reaction unfold from his study, scrolling through his smartphone with a mixture of pride and vindication. Comments flooded in praising Maya's dedication and questioning why the Whitmore family had initially tried to remove her. The narrative Margaret had so carefully constructed of an opportunistic employee manipulating a vulnerable child crumbled as viewers witnessed the genuine connection between Ethan and his caregiver. "They're calling her a miracle worker," Mr. Hargrave remarked, placing a cup of tea beside Charles. The butler's usual stoicism had softened, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "She is," Charles replied simply. "I just wish I'd seen it sooner." At Maya's apartment, friends gathered around her small television, cheering as each news segment aired. She sat quietly, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from people she hadn't heard from in years, journalists seeking exclusive interviews, and even offers for book deals. "I never wanted fame," she told her closest friend. "I just wanted to help him." Back at the estate, Ethan practiced walking with renewed determination, insisting on showing Maya his progress during their next session. The staff, witnessing the child's transformation, began openly acknowledging Maya's contribution. Even those who had once whispered behind her back now spoke her name with respect. Margaret's carefully orchestrated campaign of intimidation lost its power overnight. Her social media accounts went silent as former allies distanced themselves, not wanting to be associated with someone who had tried to prevent a child's recovery for the sake of appearances. For the first time since entering the Whitmore mansion, Maya felt the weight lifting from her shoulders. The truth had finally broken through. Carried on the wobbly but triumphant steps of a little boy who refused to give up. The evidence against Margaret Whitmore mounted like a slow-moving avalanche. Security footage from the mansion, testimony from staff members, and the discovery of surveillance equipment in Maya Williams' quarters created an undeniable pattern of harassment. When Atlanta police officers arrived at the Whitmore estate with an arrest warrant, the household staff watched in stunned silence as Charles's sister was escorted out, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest. "You'll regret this," Margaret hissed at her brother as the officers guided her toward the waiting police vehicle. Charles stood motionless on the mansion steps, his face a mask of grim resolution. The charges were severe: criminal harassment, attempted blackmail, and child endangerment, the last stemming from her attempts to separate Ethan from the only person who had successfully helped him walk. The Whitmore name, once synonymous with power and prestige, now headlined every news broadcast in Georgia. Longtime friends of the family suddenly had no comment when reporters called. Country club memberships went unused. Invitations to elite social gatherings mysteriously stopped arriving. The dynasty that had ruled Atlanta society for generations found itself isolated, its foundation cracked by the exposure of its ugliest secrets. "They're abandoning ship like rats," Mr. Hargrave remarked to Maya as he arranged fresh flowers in the foyer, his usual formality softening into something like camaraderie. For Maya, the aftermath brought an unexpected challenge. News vans parked outside the estate gates. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests. Morning shows wanted the Miracle Maid story. Publishers offered book deals. Her simple life had been replaced by relentless attention. "I just helped a child walk," she told Charles one evening, as they reviewed the day's media requests. "I never wanted any of this." The billionaire nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Your dignity throughout all of this, that's what people are responding to. You never lowered yourself. Even when Margaret tried to bury you." Maya's mother called daily, worried about the spotlight's glare on her daughter. "Stay true to yourself," she advised. "Don't let them turn you into something you're not." Maya took those words to heart. She declined most interviews, but carefully selected a few platforms where she could speak honestly about her work with Ethan. She redirected questions about Margaret toward discussions of children's rehabilitation. When asked about the Whitmore family's treatment of her, she spoke of transformation and growth rather than resentment. "The real story isn't about me," she told one persistent reporter. "It's about a little boy who never gave up, and what happens when we truly see each other beyond titles and expectations." Her dignity, once weaponized against her, had become her greatest strength, and the one thing no amount of money or power could take away. Charles Whitmore stood at the window of his study, watching as Maya Williams guided Ethan through his exercises in the garden. The morning light caught the determination in both their faces. 6 months ago, he would have scoffed at the idea that his son's salvation would come from someone he once considered merely staff. "I have a proposition," Charles said later that evening, inviting Maya to sit in one of the leather armchairs that had previously been off-limits to anyone below his social circle. "I want to establish the Ethan Whitmore Institute for Children's Rehabilitation, and I want you to lead it." Maya's eyes widened. The offer hung between them, a bridge between worlds that had once seemed impossibly distant. "You understand these children in ways my expensive specialists never could," Charles continued. Humility replacing the authoritative tone that once defined him. "What you did for Ethan, other families deserve that chance." Maya ran her fingers along the arm of the chair, considering the weight of his words. The institute would mean stepping into the spotlight permanently, becoming a public figure rather than returning to the quiet life she'd once known. Her modest apartment in East Atlanta suddenly seemed like a sanctuary compared to the scrutiny she'd face. "Oh, did I need time?" she finally said. That night, unable to sleep, Maya wandered into Ethan's playroom. The walls were covered with his latest drawings, colorful scenes that tracked his emotional journey as much as his physical one. Her fingers traced a new addition, Maya standing confidently on a stage, surrounded by children in wheelchairs, walkers, and braces. Some were standing, others trying, but all were smiling. Ethan had written in his childish scrawl, "Miss Maya helps everyone walk." The next morning, Mr. Hargrave discreetly delivered a stack of letters to her quarters, messages from parents who had heard about Ethan's progress, begging for help with their own children. "They arrive daily," the butler said softly. "I thought you should see them." One letter contained a photograph of a little girl in a wheelchair, her eyes holding the same longing Maya had first recognized in Ethan's gaze. When Ethan found her later, he clutched a new drawing in his small hands. "Is this going to be real?" he asked, showing her a picture of a building with Maya's Place written above the door. Maya knelt beside him, seeing not just Ethan, but all the children who needed what she could offer: dignity, patience, and unwavering belief in their potential. "Yes," she said, her decision crystallizing in that moment. "I think it is." The Whitmore mansion underwent a remarkable transformation. What once stood as a cold monument to wealth and status now radiated warmth that seemed to emanate from its very foundations. Maya Williams moved her few belongings into a spacious room on the east wing, where morning sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the estate's meticulously maintained gardens. The space felt surreal after years of occupying the cramped servant quarters tucked away in the shadows. Each morning, Ethan's laughter echoed through corridors that had previously known only hushed, deferential tones. The boy who once couldn't stand now raced through hallways, occasionally stumbling but always picking himself up with determination that mirrored his caretaker's spirit. The staff, witnessing this daily miracle, gradually shed their former prejudices. Even those who had once whispered behind Maya's back now greeted her with genuine smiles. "Miss Williams," Mr. Hargrave said one morning, the formality in his address now carrying respect rather than distance. "The East Garden is particularly lovely this time of year. Perhaps you and young Master Ethan might enjoy breakfast there today." Charles found himself spending more time at home. His priorities fundamentally shifted. The billionaire who once measured success in acquisitions and deals now counted his son's steps and smiles as his greatest achievements. He'd often pause in doorways, watching Maya and Ethan together, marveling at the bond between them. "I never thought I'd see this house feel like a home," he confessed to Maya one evening as they watched Ethan sleeping peacefully. "Thank you for showing us what truly matters." Diane Cooper arrived at the estate on a crisp autumn morning. Her reputation for journalistic integrity preceding her, unlike the tabloid reporters who had hounded Maya for sensational headlines, Diane approached with genuine interest in the human story beneath the scandal. "I want to tell your story the way it deserves to be told," the journalist explained as they walked through the gardens. "Not as gossip or sensation, but as a testament to resilience." Over several days, Diane observed the natural rhythm of life that had developed between Maya, Ethan, and Charles. Her article, when published, painted a portrait of healing rather than scandal, of barriers broken not just physically, but socially and emotionally. The miracle at Whitmore Estate became the headline that reframed public perception. Where tabloids had once speculated about impropriety, readers now saw a story of courage, transformation, and unexpected family. The piece captured how one woman's dignity had not only taught a child to walk, but had also guided an entire household toward redemption. 6 months after that first impossible step, the Whitmore Estate glowed with warm light against the Atlanta twilight. Maya Williams stood on the mansion's grand staircase, Ethan's small hand firmly clasped in hers. The boy who doctors had declared would never walk again now climbed each step with determination, his progress marking each day of their shared journey. The celebration below buzzed with conversation and laughter, a sound once foreign to these marble halls. Charles Whitmore watched his son from across the room, his eyes reflecting both pride and humility. The billionaire, who had once thrown Maya into the koi pond, now championed her vision for children's rehabilitation with fervent dedication. "Look how high we are, Maya," Ethan exclaimed, reaching the landing. His voice carried across the foyer, drawing smiles from guests who had witnessed his remarkable transformation. "You did all the work," she replied softly, straightening his little bow tie. "I just showed you the way." Mr. Hargrave approached with a silver tray of sparkling cider, offering the first glass to Ethan with a formal bow that made the boy giggle. The butler's quiet support had evolved into open admiration, his testimony during the legal battle having turned the tide against Margaret's schemes. Across the room, Diane Cooper chatted with potential donors for the Ethan Whitmore Institute, her thoughtful reporting having transformed a scandal into a story of healing. The journalist caught Maya's eye and raised her glass in silent acknowledgement. Charles joined them at the top of the stairs, his hand briefly touching Maya's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable half a year ago. "The board approved everything," he said. "Construction begins next month. The institute would welcome its first children before Christmas, offering hope to families who, like Charles, had been told to accept limitations rather than possibilities. Outside, beyond the estate's iron gates, the community that had rallied around Maya during her darkest days continued their support. What began as protests had evolved into partnerships, bridging divides that money alone could never span. As Ethan demonstrated his newest skill, walking backward, to delighted applause, Maya caught a glimpse of her reflection in one of the mansion's ornate mirrors. She barely recognized herself, not because of the elegant dress that had replaced her maid's uniform, but because of the quiet confidence that now defined her presence. The ghosts of judgment and prejudice still lingered in corners of the estate, but they grew fainter with each passing day, overshadowed by something stronger. Maya had indeed taught Ethan to walk, but her greatest achievement lay in teaching an entire household and beyond to stand tall for dignity, truth, and love that transcended every boundary they once thought immovable.